Friends, welcome back to the Wild at Heart podcast in the week of September 23rd. Happy fall, everybody, as we transition into that. Before I introduce my special guest this week, three beautiful people that you're going to love getting to know, I want to tell you two things. First off, we are finally releasing our Wild at Heart docu-series, the stories of men and their families who have been utterly transformed by God through this message. It's like a Netflix, incredible, gorgeous series. And you can watch the trailer for that this week. And that's in the show notes. If you want to click on that, it's really good. It's really fun. The series is going to start releasing in October. The other thing I wanted to point out to kind of set up where we're going this week is I was reflecting this morning. In 2018 and 2019, we were using an introduction to the podcast that always went like this. Wholeheartedness is no longer an option. Maturity is no longer an option. And then the pandemic rolls through the world and everybody is hard pressed to hang on to their maturity and their wholeheartedness. Okay. So we kind of been doing that again this year, not using that language, but we've been focusing a lot on well-being, integration, maturity, discipleship. And this podcast is going to be great to take us into that some more. So let's go into our pause and just wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you're at the gym, at work, carpool line, let's take a moment and just release everything to God and center ourselves in Him again and into His love. Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, I release everyone and I release everything to you. I need to give you my day, God. I need to give you my week. I need to give you everybody. Just help me lay it down right now in a moment of release. Projects, school, the kids, my parents, whatever it is, friends, you need to just let go for a moment. So you can just come back to yourself, come back to your own soul, and come back to the presence of God right here with you. Take a moment and release the things you need to lay down. And we pray, restore our union. Restore my union with you, God. Breathe into me the breath of life again. Breathe into my heart and soul. Your love, your presence, restore our union. And we pray that you would meet us in this week's podcast. Amen. Okay, everybody, now you can see who's in the studio with me this week and you are intrigued. Those of you who are watching, those of you who are listening, I'm going to introduce Stacy Burton, Director of Women's Ministry here at Wild at Heart. And you've been on the podcast many times.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Stace.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
And my son, Sam Eldredge, who is a therapist and the director now of an intensive called Noble Workshops. And Stacia Littlefield, new to most of you, but not to us, also a therapist and a colleague of Sam's in the intensives that you all do here in Colorado. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like almost I should introduce Stacia. Like I've known Stacia, had the privilege for 7-8 years.
Yeah,
I think you'd
at
be
least
hard pressed to find someone that's more thoughtful and caring in the therapeutic world. So it's a gift to us that she's part of the Noble team.
Thank you. Friends.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody.
Yeah.
We just have that warm moment together.
Well, the way that you are able to trust people in this field, the way that you need to know that you're in good hands,
100%.
like
True.
it makes, it's everything.
It's really
what it's built
important.
on.
Yeah, that's really good. So we have been talking this year and kind of even into this fall. One of the trends of God that I have seen in the world recently is he seems to be accelerating people's either awareness of their need for restoration and or their pursuit of it. I see it in my own life. I see it in my friends. I see it in our colleagues. I see it in our world. This is a good thing. This is a good trend. It is the care of God in a moment like this. And we've been talking about, one of the words we were using was punishing. It's a punishing moment of culture to live in so much tension, anxiety, uncertainty, these things. The good news is, and the hope we want to offer this week is, there seems to be an acceleration of the work of God in people's lives to bring about more wholeheartedness and well-being, more maturity as well. And so I'm just curious for you guys, what has contributed to your well-being this year? What has contributed to your own healing and wholeness and greater levels of integration?
Dad, for me, it's been a lot of daily movement and daily centering, to be honest, as well as the faith practice that I and my family have. But I've met with Sam Jolman, who the audience listening here is probably familiar with, and he said this thing to me the other day, that as therapists, one of our priorities should be our presence and vitality in the room. And so focusing on that immediately came to mind was like, I've met with some doctors who are on like the family practice level, who you walk in and like the smell of cigarette smoke is still kind of wafting off of them. Yeah. And you just have this like look in their eyes of go do as I say, not as I do. And it's a very disingenuine experience to go, okay, if my goal is not only my own care, but if I'm caring for others and my presence and vitality is this goal, what do I need to do that? So for me, it's a lot of things. Like I've loved going for walks, listening to fiction audiobooks. I've loved our Wednesday night and sometimes Saturday night Vespers services. Like those rhythms have been profoundly grounding for me this year. And I don't love the fall. So as it was creeping in here in September, I found myself just staring out the windows for a minute going, no, it's okay. You can still go for your walks. It's going to be cooler. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So that you just named a combination of things: personal rituals, family, faith practices, Vespers on Wednesday night, a collection of practices.
Right.
That are helping you stay well.
Yeah, you're going to see that theme for me. I think things should be robust and diverse.
Okay.
And so
all right.
Just one thing probably isn't going to do it for you. So if you're wondering why beers on Friday afternoon aren't doing it for you, it's one tiny little lifeline. You can't build something on that.
Yeah, we want to talk about that today, a fuller palette of things. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
How about for you, Stacey?
Yeah, well, unlike Sam, I'm so excited that it's September.
I'm so glad
I cannot wait. And also I've been going for walks in the morning. And so in the summer and then coming into the autumn, just starting to see the leaves change. That's just been so grounding before I go off to my day and clients. And kind of like Sam, I feel like this year God has been moving me and just convicting me more to be like, what would balance and flourishing look like, even as I pour myself out in these different contexts. And so some of it has been just really investing in things that look nothing like therapy, like reading fairy tales, writing, and also like a prayer practice.
Yep.
So that's been really grounding and just having more of a full and that robust life that you then have more to give. Yes. So that's been such a gift this year for me.
Stace?
I think the same movement and my morning walks or jogs. What's interesting to me is that it is always a tension in my head. Like, do I sleep in and that's kindness? Or do I get up before work and that's kindness to get outside and get some fresh air? But I never regret going outside because I know that's where I meet God. And I think I know that's why the enemy makes it such a difficult choice in the morning. But I think I am starting to learn that it's a non-negotiable practice I need to do.
Yeah.
To meet with God in that space. I mean, it's where my heart comes alive. It's my worship and it's my sacred space with him. And it is. I mean, that's why the enemy's like, or sleep in
Or
and then be
sleep in.
frazzled the rest of your day.
Yeah. Right.
It's hard to find that balance of kindness and what's needed.
And with the background to these three stories, I'm going to share mine in a moment, is you all have been very intentional over the years with your own healing journey.
Yeah.
Counseling, therapy practices, prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Healing prayer, integrative exercises.
Right. It is a time of prayer and I'm married to a counselor. So I do get, I say that I get the support of it's important to really pay attention.
Yep.
And in March this year, I was able to attend the Noble Workshop, and that was a huge catalyst to God. I'm in a season of shifts, like every aspect of my life, things are changing into new, and I don't know, it was just so timely. And God was able to really come in some intense ways. And it's been carrying on through the months.
Yeah. In the practices that you were describing, what I wanted to say was you are now sustaining progress that you've made, right? These things that you do daily, weekly, are our attempts to carry on with the good things that have taken place, whether it's maturity or healing of wounds, childhood stories, right? Now we're trying to hang on to the well-being that we have. Yeah. Right. So for me, those practices like the daily walk in the woods with the dogs, and when I say the woods, I mean the public open space that's down the street.
There are trees. It does qualify.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like
beautiful.
super romantic. I just don't want the listeners to fantasize John Eldredge's amazing life. And those things are all really important to me. But this year, personally, I was aware that I need to pay more attention when these emotions that come up out of nowhere, and my daily walk is not addressing that. Like there's something deeper going on in me that needs care and needs attention. And so that's been a rich part of the year for me as well, is kind of a fresh round of paying attention to the things inside of me that my normal practices don't seem to be resolving. They're helpful, they're care, but they don't seem to bring resolution to it, which is why I wanted to have the three of you in today, because I want to put some hope in front of our listeners, and I want to put a kind of invitation of God is making more and more resources available to his people and to humanity for our well-being in an hour that can feel pretty chaotic and sometimes even punishing. Let's chase those things. Let's go after that. So Sam and Stacia, you guys have, with your colleagues, begun to kind of, I almost want to say, pull from different disciplines within the therapeutic world into a sort of combined palette of resources and experiences that seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah.
And I want you to describe a little bit about that. Why a palette of resources as opposed to maybe just like conventional talk therapy?
Maybe I could even have Stacia begin that with how that's changed for you and what like drew you into therapy in the first place, and then over to how that's landed where you currently are.
Yeah, that sounds great. So kind of my journey with therapy, I would say hindsight is 2020. Like as I look back in my life, there are different things that definitely have pointed me to therapy, but definitely didn't start out as a therapist. It's like second or third career. I thought I was going to be, or I was a music major and took all these psych courses, but then knew that it was kind of a long road. Like you had to have a master's, you had a couple years of licensure. I was like, too much at 18. So I just started that process a decade later, but was really grateful just for the life experience and honestly for going through my own healing journey. And with that, I knew even when I began that journey, I wanted to work with trauma and do more experiential therapy. So not just the conventional talk therapy, because that had been really what moved the needle for me. And even just with my story, with different aspects of trauma in my past. And so even something called EMDR, and which is not talk therapy, but it's this experience that enables you to really titrate a traumatic experience. So you have just a little bit, you bring to mind what happened, but you have support and you know you're present. And it's not just this logical, I know I'm safe, which is kind of an oxymoron. It's this, I feel I'm perceptually safe. So even from that, from the get-go, I was very much like, okay, even while I want to incorporate different aspects, the positives of talk therapy, it has to go beyond the cognitive to the embodied, to the emotional, the relational. And that's where I found transformation for me, as well as years of practicing with my clients as a therapist. And that was the thing that really fascinated me about this Noble workshop that Sam, about a year or so ago, told me about. And I was really intrigued. So one of the things was he was mentioning it's about 2 years of therapy, of, weekly individual therapy crammed into 1 week. And I totally didn't buy it. I was like, there's no way. Just because that's a pretty high, like a pretty big claim. But then I got even just a taste of it myself, and then ended up doing my own work, my own training, and then doing it with Sam as a colleague. I believe it. And it's insane. And I think part of it is because it has these experiential modalities that go so deep. So I think one phrase that I come back to is it's been said that our reality is comprised of the stories that we tell ourselves. And as you go through life, whether it's trauma or distressing family situations, whatever it is, we kind of end up believing these lies that we may not even be aware of about ourselves, about our world, about our family, about God. Like it's my fault. I am bad. I'm unlovable.
Yes.
I will never get over this.
Yeah.
And I know from personal experience, as well as with so many people, you can be the smartest person in the room, right? And quote unquote, know all the right answers. But these deep kind of internalized shame messages are really hard to shake. And so one of the things I've really appreciated is with psychodrama and with experiential techniques is it's redemptive work in that it changes the story. Yeah. And you actually can witness it being changed with that needed support. So you're not going into it alone, but you're going back to that moment in time, to that challenging event, the distress, whatever it is. And actually you're able to do this redemptive work of saying what you needed to say to your 8-year-old inner child, or having her do something different. It changes those fundamental, very deep stories that have made up our reality. So then I was in.
Yeah, I want to unpack this. You just said so many wonderful things.
Are they all intriguing, right?
Yeah.
I want to go back to your line about our stories, our perception of the world. Could you say that again? Is made up of the stories we...
Yes, like our reality is made up of the stories that we tell ourselves.
Okay.
About ourselves, the world, God, relationships.
I just want the listeners to just linger with that for a moment. Wow. Really? Like I have framed a whole reality for myself through the stories that I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
It's a big thought. And then what we're introducing here in today's podcast is these things even become like embodied in us. They become so interwoven into the fiber of our being that sometimes it takes other tools than conventional talk therapy, which we all believe in and we've all done.
Right.
Yes.
And I think a piece of the importance of that is that it matters, the story you've told yourself.
Yes.
And it's my story that I've told myself. So when I bring it to, for example, my parents, and they're like, that's not what happened, it's a little crazy making. So then shame enters in. So there's a place to honor that place, that story, and also the healing that'll come however it happened. Does that make sense?
So important.
It can feel very lonely.
Yeah.
Because you're like,
And a little crazy making.
a little crazy.
When people don't understand.
Well, more than that, as a kid, you have two options. When you're experiencing something that's dissonant with your reality, with maybe you can't express emotion and still get connection, you have really one choice if you want to survive.
Yeah.
And that is, I will push that down and I will accommodate the narrative that I'm in.
Yes.
And then that gets kept, that gets stored, that just lives there. And then it blows up in all sorts of ways. So a lot of what we begin with are chasing symptoms in therapy. And I've begun to use the metaphor that therapy is a little bit like coffee. And so if we all said like, hey, I had coffee this morning, I no longer know what that means, because maybe you got like a great caramely frappuccino-y thing from Starbucks. Maybe you had was instant coffee from a Folgers plastic tub. Maybe you got some third wave pour over. We're not really drinking the same thing, but we are. And that to me has been the best metaphor, because I love, and I'm always looking for the ones that fit. The place that talk therapy and one-on-one and beginning to be curious plays, the place that for someone who's been through grief, maybe they do need a group of around them that has experienced it. Maybe they need just one other person, but looking for the key, looking for the right fit for the right people.
Yes.
And the right time.
And the right time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Timing is important. So you guys have begun to pull in things that you're calling psychodrama and experiential therapy. You're going to need to define that for our listening audience.
Totally. So there was a moment a few minutes ago when Stacia was saying, then I got to experience it a little bit. And so traditional talk therapy, you're typically one-on-one, or if you're doing couples work, it's going to be 2-on-1. Maybe it's a family system, but it's a pretty limited room. And you can do experiential work in that. When Stacia was trying to kind of pitch the vision of Noble, I was like, come on, we'll just do let me show you an hour of this. So I had Stacia, another guy on the team, Michael, and rather than stay in our prefrontal cortex, that forward, last developed part of our brain that we use for intellection, to think, to connect dots. I love hanging out there. I love trying to connect things, but none of our real core memories are stored there. They're stored further back in this more limbic activated part of our brain. We need to do things to get access there. And you can learn how to turn inward. And that's what a lot of other practices will do. It'll be like, okay, pay attention. I think that's what some of your going deeper prayers are doing. Let's turn inward. Let's be able to get access there.
Yep.
For a lot of us, we need some handrails. We need, okay, let's all stand up. Like already things are changing. My body's already involved. Okay, now let's move. Okay, moving is actually a form of EMDR because you're using your left and your right hemisphere. Okay, now we're going to have you not just talk about your mom, but let's embody your mom in the room with an object. And in psychodrama, we typically would use a scarf, a chair, a name tag, something that is definable, concrete. And then back to our moment, I did this with Michael and Stacia. A scarf goes over someone, and then you look that person in the eyes and you go, okay, now you are talking to mom. And almost immediately, it's like you got past 7 gates and tears are there because you are looking into someone else's eyes. There's these things called mirror neurons. You're able to empathize and connect on the microsecond level, and the stakes get very high in that moment.
Because you are now accessing things stored way back in the more limbic memory.
Yes.
Right. Or we might also say just the deep recesses of your being. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yes. And all of
through movement, experiential embodiment in the room. Oh, gosh, I remember doing this. First time I did this with a brilliant pair of trauma therapists, the chair exercise, right? Of I'm in one chair and mom is in the other, and now I'm having a conversation. Holy smokes. It was just
Yeah, for you moms listening, we're not going to keep beating up on that example.
Yeah.
It's a powerful one.
Uncle Tom,
Yes.
my coach, Coach Reggie, whoever needs to be in that chair that was part of the wounding memory.
Yes.
That exercise was so disarming to me, and therefore
important.
got past a lot of my defenses and took me into an experience that was very powerful.
Can I share my examples, like real life at Noble Workshop? So, my therapist in the group, it was a group of 5 of us, I want to say, and psychodrama. And I am like a little, I don't like practicing conversations when you have to have a hard conversation. I don't enjoy, let's practice this. So, but the one thing I've learned about therapy is if you don't enter in with open hands and an open mind, it's probably not going to work well for you. So I was grateful for the opportunity and willing to try. And so our challenge was to come up with a story that we're having a hard time getting past. And we literally had to draw it, and then we brought it to group. That's the other thing, group therapy. I had not really had any positive group therapy experiences. So that was another thing stepping into with like, okay, this is a huge risk. But the therapist was amazing. And I think that really matters. I think who you have invited onto your team, y'all do a really incredible job. Caring hearts. Anyway, so I drew my picture, and what it basically was my needing to hold up the world. Like it's all up to me. I carry everything and everyone. And much to my dismay, I literally had to hold a ball in the air through my session.
Oh, you're kidding.
So the next step was to act out our photo.
Come on.
Act out the picture we drew. But again, like, when am I going to let the world down? At what point? And no, I'm not going to. But what was precious about that was I was able to, okay, this person in my group is going to play God or represent. This person's going to represent my dad. This person's going to represent my mom, my children. And the powerful moment was when I was able to literally place God between my parents and me. And again, it's not
like literally,
it's literally I took
in the
them
room?
physically, took the
wow.
group participant who was representing God in my time and placed him between my parents. And so that was extremely a powerful, profound moment.
So you're holding the ball. Like, do you ever get to put it down? Is that part of
I do set the ball down. So
wow.
it is when I put God between me and my parents, there was a freedom of, and other things, of course, like someone represented my husband and my children. And the freedom of, I can give the ball to God.
Okay.
And I literally gave the world back to God.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So this is what we're describing is experiential.
Yeah. And a lot of things fall into that category, right? So going for walks, and people maybe have done a form of this in the youth group where you like carry a rock up the last hill. And at the top, you need to release it there. We do a final exercise that I won't spoil so that you're able to enter into it finally. But that's a highlight for me, is this moment where there's a labyrinth, messages are involved, and people's releasing of said messages are involved. You just get to stand and watch, like, the act of writing something down and the act of leaving it somewhere and turning from that place has such power. So whether it's a ball over your head, a conversation with a figure, and they can get very intense. I know someone that did this empty chair activity with their abuser and began to have a full body panic attack. And like, it is very activating stuff. And so I love what you said, that we have a really good team, Stacey. And I would say we also work really hard to resource in the experiential world, because I don't want to just throw you down into these memories. And maybe it's a group member. They share some memory that's triggering for you. The data is that when you're in a group, you get 70% of the experience as the protagonist at the time. So you're witnessing
Yes.
and you're maybe enrolled and participating, going through your own work, but you also need all these resources, which I can explain more later if that's helpful. I remember I was just doing some more work personally not that long ago, and I was enrolled as someone's husband really briefly and asked to say the message to the woman who was the protagonist. You do you, I'll take care of me. And as soon she said the line and she was calm, and then she gave me the line to say, and I said it and she cracked immediately. And I'm with her in it, but I'm also thinking of my wife. I'm also thinking of the voice that I have as a husband. I'm thinking of the voice I have as a father. So I'm very much in the room participating for her benefit and doing my own 70, maybe plus work in that particular instance. So there's a lot of things that fall into the experiential bucket. We've just chosen to narrow that focus for the week because it could be a very long intensive if we didn't.
Yeah. Well, okay. So part 2 of my story, exactly that. I was like, can you really glean participating and watching the other? So this gal in my group had me be her mom. And I was just trying to figure out how to be her mom. And it came through my head, like, how would my mom stand? And it was in that moment, God download for 49 years, I've been trying to be my mom, who's completely opposite of who I am ultimately. And the invitation then to Stacy, you can be yourself was just, and that was probably the most profound takeaway. And what God has done through that healing and opening sense is just really dumbfounding. So
it
was amazing.
What's fascinating about these embodied stories, you're acting things out, you're entering into experiential things. I was suddenly thinking of Dallas Willard's his basic thing when he wrote The Spirit of the Disciplines on the place of the kind of the historic spiritual disciplines in our lives. He was saying most people don't know what to do with their body.
Yeah.
And so they just sit there while they pray, or they just sit there while they process, and he's like, you have to get your body involved.
Yeah.
And isn't that fascinating that
Yes.
it wasn't pertinent to experiential therapy at the time he was saying that, but it's enormously
it's deeply embodied. Yes.
relevant to it. So Stacey, give me another example of tools that you use. What do you have people, quote, do?
It's a great question. It's kind of funny because you could describe it and it might sound kind of crazy, but then when you're in it and experiencing it, it, like Sam mentioned, goes to a whole other place. So I think 2 elements that are pretty unique and what make it so powerful are, first, we use a lot of imagery and symbol. So like Sam mentioned, we might use a scarf, or we might actually craft a scene, like you mentioned, standing on a chair.
Yeah.
And so going back to even those memories, there's these specific memories where you don't really have access to certain part of your story or your emotion or your body unless you kind of re-enter that scene. And so what we do is integrate, not extensively necessarily, but we really do set the scene and enroll other people and use these symbols of scarves or other objects. We really use those symbols to recreate those moments that have been kind of had us stuck for maybe decades. I mean, I worked with people who, gosh, in their first scene where they were the main person, they had this closure that they hadn't been able to get for almost 50 years.
Oh my.
And they would get triggered over different situations or conversations, but it'd always go back to that place. And so there's this possibility in psychodrama, they call it surplus reality, right? Where you can have conversations with family members where maybe for various reasons you wouldn't be able to in our reality, right?
Yes.
Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe the person's not ready. Maybe the person's passed on. And so I think that's one of the huge techniques where you can get this real closure, and kind of move your story along. I know for me personally, one of the pieces of work I did was with a family member that had passed on and had died years and years ago. But being able to have a conversation, not in a weird seance-y way, but to be able to say some things that I yearned to be able to say but couldn't, to a real life human being. I mean, I don't mean to exaggerate, but I will treasure that forever. Truly.
It's powerful.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think one of the elements of making it so powerful, and this is another thing that we get to implement, is what you mentioned about group therapy. Now, I'm a very private person.
Yeah, exactly that.
The thought of it is like, oh gosh, please, no. But I go back to this other just core tenet of how I do therapy is that our wounds are through relationship, but our healing will also be through relationship and through connection. And I've found that in this way of doing it, there's a lot of, like Sam mentioned, a lot of containment and a lot of structure and boundaries, and everyone gets a voice in that. And okay, this is what I'm comfortable.
Safety is what.
Therefore, safety.
Okay.
Yes. And so there's very deep vulnerability that's possible, but with a lot of safety in the room. And that enables you to have witnesses, right?
Yeah, I couldn't have done it without my group.
Yeah. And I've heard that over and over. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it taps into this beautiful truth that we are all image bearers of God, and sitting across from someone who has chosen to enroll in the service of your healing. Yeah. Right. Is just, it takes your breath away.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly healing for them to remind you of those resources, of what your best friend would tell you, of what you know who you are to be in Christ.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most powerful things too, that we do have group therapy, but in a very structured, safe way.
Yeah.
Two thoughts to piggyback off of that. I've been just struck over and over again recently while doing this of the creation narrative and how there's this moment where man's connection with himself is whole. Man's connection with God is whole and unbroken. Man's connection with the world is whole and unbroken. And it's the first not good thing. He cannot be alone. Safe to say, our connection with ourselves, God, the world are not great anymore. And yet we needed others even when it was good, even when it was perfect. So that role that we play as agents in each other's lives, I just think can't be understated. Another piece that you were mentioning in that, Stacey, that there's a snapshot I have from one of my groups earlier this year where one of the men in the group was going back into his childhood and wanted to not be alone. Like he was able to get access to as a boy, he just wanted to sit on the couch with his dad and his older brother. And can you come sit with me here in this place, and get to have these other group members sit close, like thigh to thigh, shoulder to shoulder, and just, you want to linger here for a little bit? And as soon as they're down, and as soon as they're touching, the relief and the grief and the maybe first the awkwardness of like, is this okay? And then know what it needs to change. What do you need to get access to? That boy should have gotten this, and you can give that gift to him now by not shaming the need, by not repressing it anymore. And it was this, here he is, not alone. People just sitting next to him by invitation. It was the key for him to begin to not feel alone in the present. There's a guy by the name of William Glasser who came up with choice theory, which is very pragmatic and practical. We don't use a ton of his stuff, but one of the things he says is your past has everything to do with who you are, and you live in the present. So how do we bring those two together?
Yeah.
The stories are precious. And to be able to sit with someone like that,
And what's fascinating is even the use of things like labyrinths. So we need to describe what that is, because that's ancient.
Yes.
Like you go to some of the ancient monasteries in the world, and they will have labyrinths there. Now, there's no minotaur. We're talking about a pathway that you walk. Describe that, Sam.
Yeah, so a labyrinth can have several different patterns, but typically you are working from the outside in, and you are walking on a very guided, structured, maybe interweaving back and forth. It takes time as you work your way in. It can feel maybe confusing how you get to where you are. And then in that style of labyrinth, you would end in the center, and there would be moments along the way for you to pause and reflect. And then in that style, you would work your way back out along the same path. Really looking for a key of like, what's something you're going to leave here in the middle? What's something you're going to take with you going forward? We do ours slightly
like
differently.
The youth group exercise, but a little more sophisticated.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, the tools exist, right? They show up in all these places, and people find, hey, this works. I don't totally know why. I don't totally need to know why.
Yes.
I'm going to run with it.
Yes.
So in that style, at a monastery, you'd find it as like a contemplative prayer walk. They would just walk and usually repeat something fairly simple, maybe Lord have mercy or something like that. And you just contemplate, meditate, ground yourself. The way that we use a labyrinth is that we don't have access to a monastery yet. Now, that would be very cool. It is again a guided, structured path that is meant to be winding and slow and causing you to reflect and engage with things. So in ours, because we are so deeply embodied, there's a point where you're engaging a poem. There's a point where you're engaging sense and touch. There's a point where you're reflecting, a point where you are leaving something and you are taking something. But you have to move and think and smell and be present or not. And according to how much you like to engage, you will receive relatively proportionally.
Yeah.
The whole few days of the Noble workshop was very safe. Like it felt like a monastery. There was so much. It's not like you did something so profound in your story and then you had to run home and pick up kids and get back to life, wash windows and all that good. And it's a space created so intentionally and cozy where there's freedom to continue to sit with what you have just processed. There's just so much space for that. And I was really grateful for all this space. I mean, even the meals felt gentle and the mornings, a little teaching of what we're stepping into that day. And so it was just such a good space.
So you're saying it's not a monastery, but we do put a lot of work into it feeling sacred and protected and very intentional.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Listeners, if you haven't connected with what we're, Sam and Stacia and their colleagues conduct workshops several times a year.
Yeah, actually, specifically, we're beginning in 2025, they're going to be basically every other month or so from this posture of you don't need healing in 6 months. Like when it's time, we'd like it to be available. Like the longest you need to wait is maybe 2 months.
Great.
So there's a couple of workshops left this year. There's a November and a December.
Nope. There's just one in November with just a few.
November.
Yep. And the next one will be in January.
Okay. And you've got a few slots left for November.
Yep.
And then next year you're going to run 6 because folks need this.
Yeah. Right.
What we're trying to do is continue to put in front of our listeners healing opportunities. And it is true. I did this with a different group of therapists. There is something about the intensive environment where you're out of your world. Yeah, you're not then going to carpool line, or you're not going back into an executive meeting where you're haggling over budgets. It's so much kinder to the human soul having surfaced these things to then take a walk, take a nap, right? Go to a kind meal where the food is good, and right? Like the intensive environment is uniquely effective. And I love your skepticism, Stacia, because you're like, there's no way. There's no way.
Very honest.
Right? 2 years and 5 days.
What in the world? Yeah. Well, and I think people are hungry. People are hungry for the real, if I can say it that way. So this immersive, embodied, encompassing the cognitive, but going way deeper. there is this hunger for it. And I think I work with adults as well as a lot of Gen Z, early 20s, teens. And I think that it only increases, right? They're not going to buy any kind of intellectualized response that doesn't actually work in the real world.
Right on.
And so I think that's partly why people love the symbol, the actual like being there. And one thing about what you mentioned too, even just with touch, I think everything really is very intentional to create a sacred, safe place. And by safety, I really mean a place of shalom.
Yeah.
Right. Not like a place where you can risk, but it's filled with the peace of God and the shalom, like as things should be, as much as we're able to provide that. And so each person has this sacred space and freedom to go where they want to go and not go where they don't want to go, right? Especially with things like touch, right? That might be the most healing thing in the world, to ask for a hug and receive it at the end. Other people are like, you know what? I'm actually going to grow in my voice and saying like, no, I'm okay, right? And so we really, and Sam does a great job of setting the stage and being so intentional from the very first talk to also this kind of reintegration plan where we prepare people for reintegrating to their worlds where they have to go back to family dynamics, work stresses, marriages, etc. So I think all of it is, just for that place of shalom, but also so that it can, all the work done there can be integrated into life. And it doesn't feel like, oh, well, I have to just go back. It's a sustained, lasting, transformative work.
Yes.
I'm so stoked that you used the word shalom.
Yeah.
Because our pals over at the Bible Project really blew my mind when they unpacked that word as I was listening to their teaching on it. And it literally can often mean, one of its meanings is to make something whole again.
Oh, I love
So
that.
something is missing and it is brought into wholeness, and that is shalom. It is now shalom again. So, the Orthodox Jews will ask one another in greeting, how is your shalom? It's like, how are you today? How is your overall well-being?
Yes.
And are all things put back into place?
Imagine if we did that. Stacy, how's your integration doing today? How integrated are you? How whole are you?
Better than yesterday.
Yeah,
Great
I
answer.
love that.
It
I
is.
just think that's the most beautiful. That's the most beautiful expression of the concept there.
Yes. Yeah. There's elements that I don't feel like I could do the workshop any other way, because there's these three dimensions we're really trying to lean into. The secular therapeutic world is very aware of this spiritual dimension, and they use it like this metaphor. There's a celestial body called a brown dwarf, which is sometimes a star, sometimes a planet, but it moves, and we can only detect it by its effect on other things.
This is a real thing in the world of astrophysics.
But I do think heavenly bodies or celestial bodies are something like my favorite pairing of words. Like, it's just, when do you get to say that? And it is called a brown dwarf. And through the use of satellites and telescopes, we can see it because it obscures light as it passes and blocks things, and it pulls things with its gravity. So you're tracking out there and go, whoa, like that star just vanished and now it's back. And now another one on a same trajectory just vanished. This is the secular world going, we can see the effect of the spiritual. We can see the effect that you have this dimension. We don't know how to quantify it, but they're trying to work with it. And then there's the world of the deeply embodied, a great work of people that are going after Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps a Score, Drama of the Gifted Child, that almost 60, 70 years old now. I mean, there's such work there that your body keeps so many memories and you live so embodied, but isolated on its own, it's not quite enough. Going off into the woods just to become a yogi, I don't think solves all your problems. And then there's this dimension of the mind. Like, how are you wounded? How are you hurt? What are the stories you're telling? How are you building your reality? And what happens when we integrate all of these? There's a quote by a Orthodox saint, Porphyrios, that goes, if you would become a Christian, you must first become a poet. This ability to be creative and whimsical and see beauty and be able to integrate things, to have presence and attune is vital. So to be able to integrate those pieces, to create safety, but also to integrate some play, to create these scenarios where you can or cannot walk through. John O'Donohue has a line that says, according to your readiness, everything will open. There are some people who just aren't ready yet for maybe the next step, but they get a little. And then there are some that these intensives, I think, are a lot for, and there needs to be a lot of follow-up, and it can open up some things. But this integration and balance, it to me feels like the bare minimum.
Yeah.
We should be doing these things.
Yeah. And it requires the palate. It requires a fuller palate than most of us have had the opportunity to take advantage of. Now, I have to do something on behalf of our listeners, because any sensitive person, any slightly alive and aware person is going to listen to a conversation like this, and bing, 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 things are going off and whoa. So I want to pray with our folks here in just a moment. And I want to invite everyone, if you can, please get to a Noble Workshop. Please sign up. The link is in the show notes. Or maybe it's your spouse, or it's your young adult child that needs to get there. We just want people well. We just want people whole, especially for the intensity of the hour that we're living in. But we have to pray, and we have to invite Christ into all this, because all kinds of things go, well, I can't get there. What about I know, everybody. I know. Let's take a moment. What I want you to do, everyone, is just take a few breaths, okay? Just a few deep breaths, because the discussion of trauma, the discussion of mother or family systems, this is all very evocative. Take a few deep breaths. There you go. Take another one. And what we ask is, Lord Jesus, come into all that this is stirring up in me right now. Come into all that this is stirring up. You are the integrative center of the universe. Would you come and be the integrative center of me? I need that. I need the North Star. I need you. Be the integrative center of me. And then, Lord, would you take one thing that I need to pay attention to in my own life that either was raised by today's conversation or you want to raise as I go into my day and into my week? Give me one thing that you are pointing my attention to. And then all of us are asking, show me where the care is, Lord. What is the next step for me, wherever you are, friends? What is the next step for me in my journey towards maturity and wholeheartedness? And that might be revisiting a therapist you saw years ago. It might be getting into a Noble Workshop, or Christ may have something else for you. He may send you on a silent retreat to a monastery. So what do you have for me? Guide me in that, Jesus, because we don't want to stir a bunch of things up and then just send you all into your day. Christ is called the shepherd and guardian of your soul in Scripture. I love that. He is the shepherd and the guardian of your soul. Show me what I need, Jesus. Amen, everybody?
Amen.
Thanks for coming in, guys.
Thanks for having us.
This is killer.
Yeah.
This is killer stuff. And Stacey came
Truly.
back from the spring workshop, just lit up like this.
It changed.
Lit up. And we're like, oh, we got to tell our friends about this again. We need to get everybody we can possibly get into these. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for offering
Thank
it.
you.